My daughter touched a cake worth more than my yearly salary. The room went silent. The groom's mother screamed my name like I'd committed a crime. But when that cake cracked open, something fell out that nobody, not even the billionaire groom, knew existed. And by the end of that night, my whole life changed forever. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to stay with me for the next 20 minutes, because this story still gives me chills every time I think about it. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because what happens around the 7-minute mark is something you will not see coming. Now let me take you back to where it all started. My name doesn't matter much in this story. What matters is that I was a mother first and a maid second. I cleaned houses for rich families for almost 6 years, and the last house I worked in belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the whole city. I won't tell you their real name, but I will tell you this: the kind of money they had, most people only see in movies. I had a daughter. She was small, maybe 7 years old at the time, with the kind of curiosity that got her into trouble more times than I could count. But she had a heart so pure it scared me sometimes, because I knew the world doesn't always treat soft hearts kindly. Her father passed away when she was only 3. He worked in kitchens his whole life, cooking for other people, feeding other families while we struggled some nights to put food on our own table. He was a quiet man, the kind who never asked for credit, even when he deserved it. I didn't know back then how much that quiet kindness of his would matter one day, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Every morning I woke up before the sun came up. I took 2 buses just to get to that mansion on time. My feet would already be aching before I even picked up a mop. But I never complained because every single dollar I earned went toward giving my daughter a life better than the one I had. That was my only goal, not riches, not comfort, just a better life for her. The family I worked for was different from most rich families I had heard about. The husband had passed away a few years before I started working there. He left behind a massive fortune, a beautiful son who was now a grown man about to take over the family business, and a second wife, the boy's stepmother, who ran that house like a queen running her kingdom. She was sharp, cold, and always watching. I learned very early that she did not like mistakes, she did not like excuses, and she definitely did not like people who worked with their hands being anywhere near her precious things. The son, the one who would soon become a groom, was different from his stepmother. He wasn't warm exactly, but he wasn't cruel either. He mostly kept to himself, buried in work, distant in that way wealthy people sometimes are when they grew up with everything except attention. I didn't know him well. I just cleaned his floors and stayed out of his way. Then one day the announcement came. He was getting married, and not just married, married in the biggest, most expensive wedding that house had ever seen. Caterers were hired weeks in advance. Flowers were flown in from places I had never even heard of. And somewhere in all that chaos, a 5-tier wedding cake was being built. A cake so massive and so detailed that it needed its own private room just to be stored safely until the big day. I remember the morning of the wedding like it was yesterday. My regular babysitter had fallen sick, and I had nobody else to watch my daughter. I almost didn't go to work that day. I almost called in and risked losing everything I had built over 6 years. But bills don't wait, and neither does rent. So I made a decision that would change my life forever. I brought my daughter with me. I told her to be still. I told her to sit quietly in the small staff room and not move, not touch anything, not wander anywhere near the main house. She nodded with those big innocent eyes, the same way children always nod when they don't fully understand how serious something is. When we arrived, the house was already a storm of motion, people rushing in every direction, flowers being arranged, chairs being set up in perfect rows, and in a private room just off the main hall, sitting like a piece of art under soft lighting, was the cake. 5 tiers tall, covered in delicate sugar flowers, gold trim catching the light, looking more like a sculpture than something meant to be eaten. The stepmother walked past me that morning, and she stopped just long enough to look at my daughter with a glance that made my stomach turn. She didn't yell, not yet. She simply said in that ice-cold voice of hers that nobody, especially outside help and their children, were to go near that cake room. She said it like a warning, like a threat wrapped in politeness. I told her, of course, ma'am, it won't happen, and I truly believed that. I went back to work, dusting, wiping, making sure every surface in that house sparkled the way she demanded. My daughter sat in the small room I had placed her in, swinging her little legs, bored out of her mind. Hours passed. Children don't understand boredom the way adults do. To her, sitting still for hours felt like punishment for nothing. At some point, while I was upstairs finishing a task, she must have wandered. I didn't see it happen. Nobody really saw the beginning of it. But somehow my little girl found her way toward that private room, drawn by the same thing that draws every child toward something beautiful: curiosity. She told me later that she just wanted to see the cake up close. She said it looked like something from a fairy tale. She reached out, not to grab anything, not to misbehave, just to touch one small sugar flower near the bottom tier, And that was enough. The cake, already delicate and top-heavy, shifted. A section near the lower tier cracked and slid, crashing down onto the table with a sound that echoed through that hallway like glass breaking in a church. Within seconds, people came running. Caterers, wedding planners. And finally, the stepmother herself, her face turning a shade of red I had never seen on a human being before. I ran the moment I heard the commotion, and what I saw next is something I will never forget. My daughter standing there, frozen, frosting on her small fingers, tears already building in her eyes, surrounded by adults staring down at her like she had committed some unforgivable crime. The stepmother's voice cut through that room like a blade. She screamed my name. She called my daughter careless, said something about people who don't know how to control their children, said I had ruined the most important day of her son's life. I felt smaller in that moment than I had ever felt in my entire life. Not because of what my daughter did, accidents happen, children are children, but because of how easily that woman tried to strip away every ounce of dignity I had built over 6 years of hard, honest work. I grabbed my daughter, pulled her close, and started apologizing over and over, my voice shaking, my hands shaking, my mind already preparing for the worst: unemployment, eviction, starting over from nothing. But then something strange happened. In the middle of all that chaos, something fell out from inside the broken section of the cake. Not frosting, not sponge cake. Something solid, wrapped tightly in plastic, almost completely hidden inside a hollow space that had clearly been built into that tier on purpose. It hit the table with a soft thud, and for a second the entire room went completely silent. Everybody stared at it. The pastry chef who had built that cake, a quiet older man standing near the back of the room, went pale the moment he saw it. His eyes went wide, his hands trembling slightly like he was looking at something he was never supposed to see uncovered. He didn't say a word at first, he just stared, like a man caught keeping a secret he had carried for far too long. The groom stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on that small wrapped object sitting in the wreckage of his own wedding cake. His stepmother moved fast, faster than I expected from a woman in heels, trying to grab it before he could. But he was quicker. He picked it up himself, ignoring her sharp protest, ignoring the dozens of eyes watching him. He unwrapped it carefully, like he somehow already sensed it mattered. Inside was a small sealed envelope, slightly yellowed with time, along with an old ring tucked beside it. Simple, not flashy, clearly not something bought recently. The pastry chef finally spoke, his voice shaking, explaining that years ago, before he passed away, the groom's late father had personally asked him in secret to build a hidden space into the base of whatever cake would be served at his son's wedding. No matter how many years passed before that day came, he said the father made him swear never to tell anyone, not even his wife, especially not his wife. He said the father paid him generously to keep that secret safe for as long as it took. The groom's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. He read silently at first, his eyes moving faster as the words sank in, his face shifting from confusion to something heavier, something that looked almost like grief mixed with disbelief. He finally spoke out loud, his voice cracking slightly, reading his father's letter to the entire room. The letter explained that the father never fully trusted his second wife with the family's fortune or with his son's future happiness. He had grown suspicious of her motives long before he passed away, suspicious enough to take precautions most people would never imagine. He wrote that if his son was finally getting married, it meant enough time had passed for the truth to matter more than secrecy. But the letter held something even bigger than a warning about his stepmother. It held a personal debt, one the father had carried with him until his final days, a debt he never got the chance to repay during his lifetime. He wrote about a humble kitchen worker, a man who once stood by him during the darkest, most dangerous period of his life, long before wealth, long before mansions and weddings and fortunes. A man who said nothing, asked for nothing, and simply showed loyalty when the father had absolutely nothing to offer in return. The letter said this man had passed away years later, leaving behind a wife and a young daughter, and the father had always intended to repay that kindness properly, but death came for him before he ever got the chance. He asked his son in his final written wish to find that family if they ever crossed paths, and to take care of them the way he never got to. The room fell into a silence so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. The groom slowly lifted his eyes from the letter, and for the first time since I had started working in that house, he looked directly at me, really looked at me. Like he was seeing me as a person for the first time instead of just hired help standing quietly in the background of his life. He asked me one simple question. He asked if my husband used to work in kitchens. My throat tightened. I nodded slowly, barely able to find my voice. I told him yes for many years before he passed away. The groom looked back down at the letter, then back up at me, and something in his expression completely shifted. The anger that had filled that room minutes earlier, The humiliation, the fear, all of it seemed to fade into something else entirely. Disbelief, recognition, and something almost like relief. His stepmother tried to interrupt, tried to dismiss the letter as fake, as some kind of trick, her voice rising in panic now instead of authority. But the pastry chef stepped forward and confirmed in front of everyone that the letter was real, written and sealed by the father himself years before his death, hidden exactly where he had requested, untouched until this very moment. There was no trick, no coincidence. Just timing that nobody could have controlled, except maybe a child's innocent curiosity about a beautiful cake. The stepmother's controlled, polished mask completely shattered in front of dozens of wedding guests. People who had once respected her now stared with quiet judgment, realizing how hard she had worked to keep certain truths buried, how much she had feared exactly this kind of moment. The groom didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply turned to me, still holding his father's letter in his hands, and said something I will remember until the day I die. He said his father wrote about honor, about people who do the right thing even when nobody is watching, and that somehow, after all these years, his father's wish had finally found its way back to the right family in the most unexpected way possible. He looked down gently at my daughter, who was still holding tightly onto my hand, frosting still on her small fingers, eyes wide with confusion about why a wedding cake had turned into something so serious. He knelt slightly to her level and told her she had nothing to apologize for. He told her that sometimes the smallest hands uncover the biggest truths. In the days that followed, everything changed. The groom made sure that whatever his father had intended all those years ago was finally honored properly. My life, and my daughter's life, shifted in ways I could never have imagined while scrubbing floors in that same house just days earlier. I won't go into every detail of what came after, but I will say this: the kindness my husband once showed a stranger with nothing to gain, and nothing expected in return, found its way back to his daughter years after he was gone. In a moment neither of us could have ever planned. The stepmother's influence over that family crumbled shortly after. Whatever control she had built over the years unraveled the moment the truth came out in front of everyone who mattered. People who once feared her began questioning everything she had done, every decision she had made, every story she had told. But for me, none of that mattered as much as one simple thing. My daughter, the same little girl who was scolded and humiliated in front of strangers just minutes earlier for touching a cake, ended up being the reason an old, hidden truth finally saw daylight. A truth that had been sealed away for years, waiting patiently for the right moment to break free. I think about that day often. I think about how close I came to losing everything over one small accident, and how that same accident ended up changing the direction of our entire lives. I think about my husband, a man who lived quietly, worked hard, and never once expected anything in return for the good he put into the world. And I think about how sometimes the universe has its own timing, completely separate from ours, waiting for the perfect, unexpected moment to reveal exactly what needed to be revealed all along. If this story touched you the way it still touches me every time I think about it, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, what would you have done if you were standing in that room? Like this video if it moved you even a little. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness never truly disappears. It just waits patiently for the right time to come back around. And if you want more real, raw, emotional stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed because trust me, there are more stories coming that you won't want to miss.